Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, the initial translation that came out for chapter 1132 was just straight up trash. They actually translated Straw Hat, I have no idea how this happens by the way, but they translated Straw Hat as Straw Hate. Come on, man. Maybe bro just secretly hates the Straw Hats and this was like subliminal messaging. Either way, you never go full manga panda. But it reminded me that it's been a long time since we've done a reading comments video. So let's do that. So I've tried to theme this comments video around particular ideas, and I hope that it'll make sense as we do the video. It won't be totally random. But just as context, the big theory that we had for chapter 1132 is that Elbaf might be an island trapped in time. We get this ominous warning at the end of the chapter from Louis Arnott, an explorer, and he says, "Adventurers, do not regret your time lost here." And then he proceeds to give a warning: do not overstay your welcome. So on one hand, Elbaf is this incredible paradise that adventurers from the past stumbled on. On the other hand, there is some lurking danger. The explanation that I gave in the review is a lot longer than this, but long story short is I think that do not regret your time lost here is a clue that the danger of Elbaf is related to time, which is fitting on a number of levels. Because the first time that we met giants in the story in Little Garden, that island was described as a prehistoric island. It was trapped in the past. And we also began Elbaf, the Elbaf arc itself, with missing time. But honestly, this is kind of under-discussed because I think that the impression that a lot of One Piece fans have is, well, this island is just, its unique flavor is just that dinosaurs live here. It plays well with meeting the giant story in Brogy, because of course they have to eat. It's metaphorically trapped in the past, but there may in fact be more mystery to the island of Little Garden than you realize. When the Strats were setting a course for Little Garden, they had a conversation with Nico Robin, and Nico Robin basically told them that if they go to Little Garden, they will surely die. And just as an aside, this was the first clue in the story that Nico Robin was not necessarily an enemy, because she offered them a pose to a different island, which was actually intended to help them. So we're told that Little Garden is a dangerous island, and we actually go there, we see that there are giants and there's dinosaurs, so, you know, it's kind of self-explanatory. But the hidden subtext to all of this is it isn't really the giant monsters of the island which are the threat. The threat is that once you arrive on the island, it takes 1 year for your log pose to reset. That is why this is an island that must be avoided. So it's just interesting to me that Little Garden is portrayed as an island trapped in time, but in like a more concrete way. The log poses work slower as well. I think that this creates the believable theory that there's actually something weird going on with Little Garden and time. So while your knee-jerk reaction to some sort of time-related phenomenon in the story of One Piece might be skepticism, you know, further down the line, more recently in the story, somebody like Toki, her devil fruit, time manipulation as a legitimate technology, power, ability, whatever, is in play. Hell, you could even throw in Foxy's slow beam as something potentially derivative. But the long story short here is that Little Garden was the island where we first met the giants, and I think that it was legitimately trapped in time, which would add some credibility to this speculation that Elbaf could be the same. So without further ado, let's get into the comments, and I think it's fitting to begin with not just one comment, but an entire comment thread, because my comment section is elite. This is from @Lazaros Moises. This is a myth from the Greek Odyssey by Homer. Odysseus spent a few days in an island, but later realized that actual years had passed without him realizing. And then a reply by Matthew Steenson. That's actually a myth that's common in most all cultures. There's a tale of the fisherman marrying the princess Otohime and returning after a few months, but it's been centuries. And then more by Mokul Jordan. Yeah, it's like the Urashimataro story, for which the Tamate Bako box on Fishman Island was based on. So shout out to everybody who made my job that much easier, but this is in fact the case. This is a really common trope in mythologies, period. And that's just another reason why this kind of theory makes a lot of sense in Elbaf. Given our expectation as we began the arc was that Elbaf spelled backwards was fable, that there would be some fable elements to the arc itself. Next comment by Cody: Elbaf turning into a training timeskip arc would be nuts. But here's the thing, I don't actually think that Elbaf becomes a training arc, because the time effect is actually working in reverse of the hyperbolic time chamber. Like usually if you're using this for training, then the area in which you're training is experiencing time faster, so the outside world moves slowly while years pass for you, so you can get maximum push-up reps. But in this case, we're speculating that days will pass in Elbaf, while a substantially more amount of time is going to pass in the outside world. We often talk about how Oda parallels the story. He inverts or he twists certain things that he's used before. Well, in this case, we've already had a Straw Hat specific time skip. That was the 2-year time skip, and that was totally about the Straw Hats and nothing to do with the outside world. The 2-year time skip only happened because these Straw Hats were not yet strong enough. I think at this point in the story, the Straw Hats are strong enough. Luffy is now literally a Yonko. He actually defeated Kaido, and we just came from an arc in which he fought all of the Gorosei practically simultaneously, along with a Marine Admiral, along with a Buster Call Plus, and they survived. So this is a time skip for everybody else. Now, of course, the magnitude of this time skip really depends on how much time is different between Elbaf and the outside world if this theory is true. If the Strats stay here for a week, right, let's say a month passes in the outside world. A lot could potentially change in a month, and that time skip might be enough. But it's really up to Oda as to what exactly he wants to do. Mainly the way that I see it is that post Vegapunk's message to the world, the actual state of the world should change in a very short amount of time. But it will take some time. In my opinion, Vegapunk's message works just the same as Whitebeard telling everybody the One Piece is real, or Goldie Roger at the very beginning say go and find my treasure. It's going to lead to an influx of piracy. But here's the difference from what it was before. Now people know roughly where to look, and if they go and they search for ruins in the bottom of the ocean, they will undoubtedly find things related to the Void Century, which the world government is willing to destroy islands in order to protect. So I think Vegapunk's message mobilizes the world government to basically take out their guns, or in this case, take out the weapon that destroyed the Lulcia and start using it, which they could hypothetically do because they have York, meaning they could recreate the Mother Flame. But in the meantime, I think that you have this escalation of chaos. The world and every country in the world will discover that they have been lied to. And they will know this for a fact because every island that exists obviously was the top of the mountain of an island that is now covered in water. So if they want to find ancient ruins, all they have to do is dive right next to where their islands are. They'll find something. So yeah, the way that I see it is that the more time passes, the more you could have general conflict between the world and the world government. This could be a fitting backdrop or a fitting setting for the final saga of the One Piece story, a world at war. And while I think that a lot of people's knee-jerk reaction is going to be that the Strats need to hurry so that they can find the One Piece before Shanks or before Blackbeard, I do think that there's like a limiting reagent here for everybody else, and it's basically that they do not possess Nico Robin. Even Roger sought out Odin before eventually finding LAUGHTALE. Being able to read the ancient language might at some point in time become important. Blackbeard has Pudding, but Pudding hasn't yet unlocked her three-eyed powers. We don't know when she would do that, and just from a story standpoint, Oda can give her this ability when it suits the story, if ever. Meanwhile, as far as we are aware, Shanks does not have anybody who can read the characters. So this effectively stops anybody from finding the One Piece, and allows for a potential time skip to happen for the outside world while the Straw Hats are adventuring in Elbaf. But beyond all of this, it's just frankly awesome to think that the Straw Hats stepped into Elbaf and basically the world was okay, and then they leave Elbaf and it's like, what the hell happened? But anyway, next comment from Perpetual Punster, and there's a lot to dissect here. If the Ancient Kingdom had a Bifrost or rainbow bridges that spanned across the world during the Void Century, would the modern Wolf Bridges, tequila, rum, vodka, and bourbon be the low-tech replacement for them? Honestly, my state of mind right now is that almost everything that we see is some derivative of something that existed in the past. But in my opinion, the key point that we learned about the rainbows in the last chapter is that there's something special about the climate of Elbaf which allows for them to exist. So in order to make rainbow bridges elsewhere in the world or potentially spanning across the world, you need the entire world to have the climate of Elbaf. The entire world's climate would be different. Is this something that I can personally believe? Looking around the Grand Line, I think the answer to that question is yes. It does appear as if the climate has been meddled with. This is something that I believe that the Ancient Kingdom could have done across the world or on a per island basis. No different than what Vegapunk accomplished in Egghead. So then you have a special climate and then a special device which creates a rainbow, and you could make these rainbows anywhere. I think that you kind of have to believe that this was likely used as a form of travel during the Void Century. If this was common, how could the world government not be inspired by it? But continuing Perpetual Punster's comment, do giants really have long lives, or does it just appear so because they spend so much time on Elbaf and Little Garden? both of which progress slower, so it appears as if they live longer. And does time pass at the same rate for the whole island or vary from level to level? So I got a few comments mentioning that this might explain why the giants live longer, and I also got a few comments that said, well, that doesn't make any sense because Dory and Brogy spent 100 years in Little Garden and, they actually lived that long. But some of the missing context of this is what I explained at the beginning of the video, which is that Elbaf, just the same as Little Garden, might have a time-suppressing effect. So if I'm looking to contradict this theory, I'm not actually bringing up Dory and Brogy, I'm bringing up all of their crew members. For instance, the crew members that the Straw Hats encountered in Eni's lobby. They weren't in Elbaf or in Little Garden. I think that it was brought up that the giants there had been guarding the gates of Eni's lobby for 50 years. So I think that from this we have to believe that giants naturally possess longer lifespans. In a way that can be similar to Zunisha, another creature that we know that is incredibly long-lived. It just is the case, giants live for 300 years. And in my opinion, it has to work this way, because whether or not a giant left Elbaf or not, they would be able to count the number of birthdays they've had. Where this would potentially be interesting is if a 300-year-old giant who's lived exclusively in Elbaf, if the time that has passed around Elbaf has been more than that, then they are actually far older than they think that they are. Something to the effect of a 300-year-old giant in Elbaf might have lived during the Void Century. And don't get me wrong, I understand that this gets convoluted. I'm sure that there might be some people that say, well, that doesn't make any sense because, like, seasons and stuff. But seasons work different on different islands. There is one island with 48 seasons in 1 year. So traveling the world would create a distorted perception of time if you just use seasons. This gets really interesting when you're talking about the two elder giants of Elbaf. It may not precisely work out this way because they spent a lot of time outside of Elbaf as captains of the giant warrior pirates. But I do find it intriguing that I do not believe that there is anything that debunks the idea that they could have lived during the Void Century. But I do think it intuitively makes sense that if there's some time-related suppression in Elbaf, that it might be strengthened the closer that you get to the tree. As just an example, Oda can do whatever he wants to. I mean, that would make sense though, but we'll find out. But I think that the last bit of Perpetual Punster's comment is probably the most important. However, how does such a time compression work with Mother Carmel? If she was raising children on Elbaf for the world government, it would take years longer to be ready to send them to the world government. Basically, we know that Mother Carmel started off as a young woman, and then she traveled to Elbaf, where she would secretly steal children. But she literally became an old woman. So if 80 years passed in Mother Carmel's life, but in Elbaf time moves slower, that means the outside world would have passed by potentially hundreds of years. That really does not seem to be the case. So this argument might necessitate Elbaf's time working different, which is most likely why Perpetual Punster brought up the comments in this order. Basically, the closer that you get to the tree, the more time distorts, but if you're on the outskirts of the island of Elbaf, time is the same. This might be required for the theory to make sense. I think for some people it might be a little bit too much of a stretch at this point in time to fully buy into the idea or not, but I think it's good to have the conversation. It would seem as if Mother Carmel is a plot hole if the entire island of Elbaf experiences time the same. But if you want to believe, this could be an explanation for why Mother Carmel chose to live where she lived. Just like Lewis Arnott warned, she discovered the danger of Elbaf. But anyway, switching gears to the mysterious rainbow in Elbaf, Clint says this: technically, the Rainbow Road doesn't need to be quote-unquote solid, it just needs to be exerting enough force to counter the forces which act upon it. Light can exert force. Source, solar sails, and solar winds. If you really want to explode your mind, you really shouldn't think about anything as solid. Like from our human experiences and human brains, you like to think, well, you can touch it, it's solid, we're solid, we feel each other, that sort of thing. But everything is mostly empty space. Particle physics is a trip. You see your skin as being whole, but really your skin is comprised of a bunch of cells. Your cells are comprised of smaller parts. You get down to it, it's like, well, each thing has an atom. But the crazy thing about an atom is that it's mostly empty space. You have a center of nucleus with a neutron and a proton, and surrounded by electrons, but it's mostly empty. And even further, if you break down the protons and the neutrons, they too are comprised of smaller things, which is mostly empty space. It's like a small-scale version of the universe at large. If our sun is the nucleus, then it's surrounded by a large majority of space. So are we really solid? It's like a legitimate question. We are designed to interact with certain things. That is what creates the illusion of solidity. But there's other things that simply pass through us and we would have never known otherwise. But yeah, I suppose the point of all this is just to discuss that really what is solid or what is not solid has everything to do with our ability to exert force on that thing and for that thing to exert force onto us. The rainbow or light is energy, but Einstein predicted 100 years ago that energy could become matter. And as we have already applied to the real world, matter can become energy. So what are we? But this comment is right that light does exert a very small force, which is known as radiation pressure. This force is incredibly tiny because the mass of light, which is negligible. But going down the rabbit hole of why things have mass is another mind bender. I'm pretty sure that I cannot explain this in a concise and understandable way, but they have something called the Standard Model. This is the great equation of particle physics, explaining how things work on the small scale. This is an incredibly successful mathematical equation that has been proven right at every turn. But one of the problems that they had when developing it is explaining why some things have mass and some things do not. And the absolutely absurd conclusion that they came to, which was later experimentally confirmed in recent history, was that there was some unknown particle called the Higgs boson, which produced a field which you can think of similarly to a magnetic field. It's different, but think of it in that way. Things have mass, and things have different masses because of how they interact with this field. So I'm just gonna stop right here and not explain it any further because all I'm gonna do is say some stuff that's gonna make you question science itself. I am not equipped, but mass itself is kind of an illusion. Almost arbitrarily, there are some things that we are designed to interact with, and there are some things that we are not designed to interact with. I'm sorry for going down this rabbit hole. And although they don't currently know how to mesh the small scale with the large scale, the same thing is kind of true in the large scale with gravity. That was one of the big things that Einstein discovered, is that gravity is an artifact of the warping of space-time. Space and time are the same thing, which is just a thing that exists that we can't see or interact with, but we can see its effects. If particles of light interacted with the Higgs field and interacted with the Higgs boson, then it would also have mass. Therefore, exert a greater force on us so that we would be able to quote-unquote feel it. What was the whole point of this tangent? I'm not entirely sure, other than nothing is real. But from like a science fiction standpoint, to be able to give light properties of mass seems feasible. It seems feasible. It's also strangely on topic to be talking about these kinds of things in relation to possible time manipulation and LBAF, just because all of these things are related. Long story short is I would not be surprised if Oda is inspired by these kinds of things when developing certain technological aspects of the One Piece world and potentially LBAF itself. And I really hope that I did not butcher this too badly. Perhaps a good time for a comment from Nick Gates. Joey Boy just randomly dropping some of the trippiest light knowledge in the middle of the video. Completely forgot that this is One Piece and not some science seminar on the fundamental questions of life. Firstly, I'm sorry. Secondly, it's cool though, right? Honestly, you could just blame Oda for this, because somehow traveling down this rabbit hole, it could actually make some sense in the story of One Piece because of how much this man researches. In my opinion, this discussion is actually relevant. Once Vegapunk and Egghead were introduced, the game was changed. But at the end of the day, this is still One Piece, and we're still exploring the realm of between science fiction and fantasy, so that always needs to be kept in mind, which is why it's a good time for this comment. Zabazoro says, I wonder if the painter and the Rainbow Road have anything to do with the girl from Baroque works that uses paint as a weapon. There are some characters in the story of One Piece who have powers that are not related to Devil Fruit and also don't seem overly scientific. What comes to mind is Django and Hypnosis, as well as Miss Goldenweek and her paint. Obviously, the idea which inspired Miss Goldenweek is color theory, that like certain colors have effects on your emotions. But colors are also intrinsically related to light. When this gets taught in schools, often rainbows are brought up because you can use a prism to split light, regular light, into all of the colors. The same thing is happening with a rainbow because it's created from light going through water droplets, which are acting as your prism. But I suppose what I want to say is that it's absolutely true in the story of One Piece that certain types of light have an effect. We know that moonlight is used in the Sulong transformation of the minks. But if you don't remember, Miss Goldenweek used particular colors to create very specific attacks on her opponents. All of this was coincidentally introduced in the same arc, Little Garden, that we first met giants. I'm just saying. So I'm just gonna go ahead and say this. How crazy would it be if the color theory thing from Miss Golden Week came back in Elbaf. There's weird elements of light here. Could the specific light of Elbaf have an effect on the Straw Hats? And I think that this works well with this comment from Type. So we know that there's some kind of danger relating to Elbaf. Here's a couple ideas for the warning at the end. Firstly, volcanoes. On Little Garden, Dory and Brogy fought when the volcanoes of the island erupted, which they associated with one of their gods. Essentially, what he's suggesting is that there's something analogous on Elbaf to the volcano from Little Garden, which is a brilliant idea. Hypothetically, this thing itself could be dangerous. Or you could just see Elbaf break out into war every time this event happens. Remember, Elbaf is also known as a war land for some reason. His second idea is basically everything is bigger in Elbaf. Big island, big weather. Basically, the storms themselves might be thematically gigantic, making it harder for humans to survive. I don't really have too much to say about this, but it seems like a very plausible idea. But the third one is the one that I actually want to focus on. Some tree disease. We have seen in the Nolan flashback that trees can cause diseases. The giants might have built an immunity from living there, but humans have not. This also works really well with the color thing that we just brought up. The light itself of Elbaf could have unique properties. But it is interesting that throughout the course of the adventure, the idea of the Straw Hats legitimately getting sick hasn't really come up since Strum Island. And the only time that it's been a real focal point in the story is in a flashback with Nolan. This just feels like underexplored territory to me. If you're looking for a hypothetical danger of staying in Elbaf, this is one of the most realistic based on the real world that you could conceive of. And it doesn't actually have to be that crazy. Remember, we're told that humans are not actually allowed in Elbaf, and the humans that we do know that have stayed here for an extended period of time did so on the very outskirts of the island. So I like the idea that Elbaf could make you sick. But I do think that we should keep in mind that there is a mysterious character in Elbaf that wears a straw hat that seems to be a human, so there might be some exception. It just reminds me of islands like the one that Usopp traveled to during the time skip. It's this land of abundant and delicious food, but the island is literally trying to eat you. But here's another comment related to this from Happy Otaku Studios. There's an IRL theory about the unproportional amount of madness exhibited in the Roman emperors compared to other rulers. The theory goes that two things resulted in lead poisoning of the upper richer classes, which leads to madness. One, the lead plumbing resulted in lead poison in the drinking water. Two, the first artificial sweetener was lead acetate, created during the Roman Empire, and it was very expensive. The upper class back then used this in meals like we use salt and pepper nowadays. It was also used as an ingredient in high-class Roman wine. There could be a similar issue in Elbaf. Bro, this comment is cooking. The fact that it's also a real-world conspiracy, I don't know, that just seems like something Oda would do. Our guy Oda is in fact a man, therefore he thinks about the Roman Empire often. Immediately as you explain this theory, I'm sure a lot of other people are thinking of Trafalgar Law's backstory and Amber-led sickness. But as we just said, you should be wary of islands which appeared to be paradises, and at one point in time, Fleavance was kind of an island that fits that description. This incredibly beautiful white city, which we might compare to a city of light, with enormous wealth, but that utopia had a catch. Noland and Kalgra and Law's flashbacks are flashbacks. We haven't seen anything like this in the current story. Next comment from Iswup. I think Elbaf is actually a lie, as in what we see now is real mostly, but the longer you stay, the harder it is to distinguish reality. That's why we saw the cat change. He then speculates that the illusion aspects of Elbaf could be related to Loki's devil fruit, which makes a lot of sense because Loki from Norse mythology as a character was often associated with the power of illusion. The mental picture that I have in my mind is if you stay too long in Elbaf or you're a giant of Elbaf, over time eventually you can't distinguish fiction from reality. So if you were living inside of Dory and Brogy's mind, like what they actually see right now is a mushroom trip. Personally, I still want the Giant's Booze or Fairy Green to be important in some way, and we were told that if you drink it, it can cause hallucinations. What if the effect is permanent? I'm also absolutely in love with the idea that lies are an important aspect of Elbaf relating to Usopp, relating to fables. I just hope so. Next comment from Justin talking about the silhouetted straw hat guy. If time moves slower on Elbaf, this person might not actually be old. So if it's Shiki or Scopper Gaban or whoever, if they went to Elbaf right after Roger's execution and stayed there all of this time, they might not have aged much. Could we see a prime Scopper Gaban? I don't know how much I would buy into this, but just as an idea, I think that this is pretty cool. You could also have a case where somebody has an illness, say they only have a few years left to live. You spend most of that time in Elbaf because maybe you want to be alive for the time that Joy Boy is supposed to return. Next comment from the Will of Dreams. Miss Goldenweek's brush may have had sunstones in it. Vegabunk's research for hard light holograms or light gloves may be from soulstones or sunstones in Elbaf. If you guys remember, there's 7 paths that you can travel across the Grand Line, 7 unique magnetic fields. When thinking about magnetic fields, I'm just going to point out to you that light is known as electromagnetic radiation. Light possesses a magnetic field. There are 7 types of waves in the electromagnetic spectrum, and there are 7 colors in rainbows or visible light. This is kind of blowing my mind. Look, I'm not going to pretend that I can fully wrap my mind around this, but it's giving me the idea that log poses have something to do with light. Just spitballing out loud here, but just for clarification, the 7 paths of the Grand Line really only apply to the first half, Paradise portion. Once you get into the New World, there are only 3 paths. However, there are 3 primary colors of light: red, green, and blue. So maybe you begin the Grand Line traveling each individual color in the rainbow, but once you get into the New World, the colors combine for pure white light. The Grand Line itself is a light map. Every island in the Grand Line that a log pose points to has some specific color coordinate. Bruh, I'm just gonna let you guys think this one over and finish off this comments video with the last comment from Gas Options Trader. Do you think LAUGHTALE is hidden the way the rainbow is? Yes, I do, or something similar. I think that there's a lot of potentially exciting ways that Oda could hide the island of LAUGHTALE. And it doesn't just have to be hidden in one way, it could be hidden in multiple ways. But as the story is nearing its conclusion, a pattern has emerged regarding light and Luffy as the sun god. It seems like if we're thinking about the advanced technology of the Ancient Kingdom, powers relating to the manipulation of light are probably a focal point. But to put it a different way, we learned in Egghead definitively that the Ancient Kingdom were masters of energy. I would strongly guess that the Ancient Kingdom became masters of essentially the equation E equals mc squared, the relationship between matter and energy. Perhaps exactly the same as we see with the rainbow and Elbaf, they could make light matter. And I think that they could also make matter light. So if you are looking for a way to hide an island so it cannot be found, I would think that you would utilize that. A place that is hidden by light, but can be made real. Just completely honest with you guys, I would be shocked if this is not the case. But anyway, this felt like a successful comments video. I hope that you guys enjoyed it, and thank you to everybody who left comments for me to be able to ramble for 30 minutes. As always, I'm curious as to what you think, so leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Remember to like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad, and as always guys, have a wonderful day.